So, Game of Thrones. How many are big fans? How many have never seen an episode and could care less? Okay. How many in between? Game of Thrones. And how many would chop my head off if I had a few spoilers in my teisho? No, well, good. First of all, the teisho will be intelligible to anyone who has never seen an episode, so don't worry about that. But I think it is important at least to know something that has such a resonance with the zeitgeist, something that so captured the imagination. It's a type of mythology, really. And myth, as Joseph Campbell reminded us some decades ago, it really is central to human understanding. All religious traditions have myths and stories that contain deep truths. You might remember Joseph Campbell himself looked to Star Wars as like the new mythology. I'm not sure it had that staying power, but it seems to in many ways. And you don't have to choose between one or the other either. You can use them all. Because Lord of the Rings, of course, the Arthurian legends. It goes back centuries. So it's worth knowing something about. So I think I'd like to discuss at least some of the issues, the major issues that it seems to me that Game of Thrones raised. Mm-hmm. I think by far the central one, and the one that spiritual traditions have most reason to address, is power. The mythology here was all about the battle for power. Who's going to get the Iron Throne? Who's going to win the kingdom? Who's going to slaughter each other effectively enough that they're going to gain the power? And this is the story of humanity. I mean, just look at history. Over millennia. It's all about who conquers which empire when, and who defeats which empire, and who's going to slaughter one another and rob and pillage, and then go for a few hundred years and then get slaughtered and pillaged by somebody else. What is wrong with us? That's insane. What is this romance? Not even a romance. What is this desperate thirst for power? Some kind of, I guess it's existential desire for control, for dominance, for some kind of safety. But the irony is, of course, as we saw in the series too, there's no safety in this kind of life. There's nothing that's satisfying. And what's it for? So you can be in control and say chop off their heads or get the money you want, or what is it for? And of course, spiritual traditions remind us, Buddhism and Christianity particularly, that power is for service. Power is to serve. Power is to empower, to share power. That's what the Trinity is. It really is about giving and nurturing. That's what power is. Real power is spiritual power, is moral power, and that's always about service. I mean, look at Jesus. He didn't want to be king. He said, I've not come to be served, but to serve. The Gentiles lord it over them. It shall not be so among you. Whoever wants to be first among you must be your servant. Whoever wants to be greatest must be your slave. Whatever happened to that? What Christian empire has ever followed that? And the Buddha himself, of course, gave up all temporal power. He had temporal power, and he gave it up for a spiritual ideal. For real power is spiritual power. And that's I think the primary lesson we learn again from that kind of story. There are dragons in many myths, and certainly in this one, very powerful dragons. And indeed, in the next to last episode, you see the evil, destructive power of the mythological dragon. That's where we get the negative dragon in Western culture. The destructive dragon, the image of Satan even. And you see the belching the fire and destroying people. But that's also, the Kundalini energy, the serpent energy that needs to be harmonized and integrated. And that's where you get the positive view of the dragon in the Eastern culture, because all that energy has to be transformed. It's compared to, a Sleeping Beauty, even with a Prince Charming, the feminine energy, but as we saw in this series, we had some pretty ferocious females in here, and they come up in mythology a lot as well, of course, Brunhilde and all of that. So it's interesting. So the integration of those energies is what's important. And indeed, in the last episode, you found that dragon had a more positive role. Faced with death, it melted the Iron Throne and destroyed the Iron Throne, saying, "This is not what power is for." That was perhaps the most moving and original aspect of the whole finale. And that's making a statement about, how futile the search for power is. It's going to end in death, yours and everybody else's. By far the most significant koan in the Zen tradition about this issue of power and who gets it and how it should be exercised, by far the most significant one is koan 23 in the Mamonkan, "Think neither good nor evil." We'll get to what that means in a second. But it's a story, a very famous koan about the sixth patriarch, Huineng, about in the middle of the 7th century, the sixth Chinese patriarch, that is, and how he got his power and what kind of power it was. Now, he was just a poor, illiterate, insignificant fellow, so no social or economic or political power, but he was gifted spiritually. So he showed up at the monastery, the fifth patriarch, and proved his wisdom by the responses he gave. So the fifth patriarch said, "Well, okay, go work in the kitchen." So he was part of the kitchen staff and cooked the rice. So finally, there was a contest among the monks about who would get the Dharma transmission to become the sixth patriarch, and there was a very famous contest, poem writing contest. That we're not going to go into that today. That's another teisho. But what happened was this Huineng won the contest, and the fifth patriarch said, "They're not going to like that I give you the transmission because you're just a lowly lay brother. So you better get out of here. You better become scarce." So he ran away with the robe and the emblems, the symbols of his power. But he was pursued by this monk named Myo, who was very, a powerful temperament and, easily irascible. And he'd been a general, military power. What do they know? So he pursues him and reaches him, finds him on the mountain, and the patriarch, seeing Myo coming, it's a part of the koan, laid the robe and the bowl, symbols of his transmission, on a stone and said, "This robe symbolizes faith and trust. How can it be fought for by force?" Indeed, true power doesn't need to be fought for by force and can't be anyway. It wouldn't be true power. "So I will leave it to you to take it." Here, take it. You don't cling to power any more than you cling to anything else. So Myo tried to take up the robe, but it was as immovable as a mountain. It reminds you of Excalibur, you can't. Only the right person can extract it from the stone. It sounds like a miracle, but Shibayama in his commentary has some very good words on this. Ino's words, "How can they be fought for by force?" Must have penetrated his mind and driven him to his final extremity. Even though he touched the robe and bowl as they lay there on the stone, in his emotional agitation, he could not lift them up. So that's how he's interpreting it. And that's what it says in the koan. It says, Myo was terrified and hesitated. And so Shibayama goes on and says, hesitating and trembling, he simply stood there, petrified. This unexpected spiritual impulse must have thrown the basically sincere and forthright Myo into the bottomless abyss of great doubt. And a great doubt is a phrase, it sounds like John of the Cross or something. A great doubt is a phrase made famous in Zen by Hakuin, a great Japanese master in the 17th century, that there has to be this great doubt, this trembling, this thing when your whole world, your whole being is turned upside down from the way you thought or the way you felt before. And that's what's happening to him here. His ego-centered and enraged self was at once completely smashed. And it goes on to say in the actual koan, His whole body was dripping with sweat. Sounds like the agony in the garden. With tears, he made a bow, So there was this tremendous passing through the abyss, passing through that great doubt. When John of the Cross speaks about the dark night of the soul, this is the kind of thing he means when your ego disappears. It's very, according to the amount of resistance or how much you've identified with it, it's painful, but it's actually a tremendous liberation. For him, it was, sweat and tears and, terror, but it was a complete change. And so he went on to say, I've come for the Dharma, not for the robe. Please teach me, O lay brother. So he recognizes the spiritual authority of someone who has no authority in this world. They're the ones who can most hold power. It has to be the little ones, those who've been wounded even, like this is a wounding that he's going through here. Those who have felt weakness, who've known that, then they're the ones that can, the wounded healer, the wounded king, the Grail King that is wounded. It's something that we have to go through. So it's interesting that the one who got the kingship his name was Bran the Broken. No accident. It's the person who's broken, and he was someone who was viciously paralyzed, thrown out a window when he was a kid, and was paralyzed. But he became a spiritual seer, a very wise. And he was the one who was entrusted with the power, and then his sister as well. And the one they are zombies in this, by the way. They always are. It's very popular in today's psyche, right? Why is that? Because we walk around like zombies. We're sleepwalking through life, as the Zen would say. So we're basically zombies. But the Night King, the king of the zombies, is slain by the young girl. Of course, it's the young female that has the hidden power. Not the mighty general. So there's lessons in all of that. And what does it remind you of? It reminds you of Frodo, for example, or the hobbits, the little ones. The little ones are the ones that save the day. And they can be severely wounded. Frodo was wounded by, he felt the weakness, he felt even, the wickedness, he was wounded by that. There's a character in the Game of Thrones, Jon Snow, who very much resembles Frodo. One commentator even pointed that out, where he was wounded by what he had to do and went off to the north to live, away from human society, like Frodo sailing off to the western lands at the end of the book or the movie. Notice in north, they go off to the north. The Celtic or the Norse myths. In Irish myth, you go off to the western lands, land of the setting sun, or the Pure Land Buddhism. It's in the west, right? The Pure Land is in the west. Very interesting. But that's the kind of what you have to go through to be worthy of power, and who you have to be worthy of power, and what power really is. So Myo was enlightened, and he asked for a teaching, and he speaks about coming to his true self. Interesting, the word, I think it's the phrase is original face, and it's elsewhere translated original self. Shibayama has an interesting commentary on that here. Let me stress the point once more. The true self is one's original true nature, in which not a thought of discrimination is working. It is the true self awakened to the Buddha nature. It is the true self that is one with reality. From ancient times, various names have been given to it, such as the true self, the true man of no title, the absolute being, or it, not the clown, although you have to make peace with your clown too, but it is who it is and what it is. And so this is the teaching that the sixth patriarch gave him at that moment. He said, think neither good nor evil. That's the name of the koan. Think neither good nor evil. Now, it doesn't mean there's not good and evil at a certain level of human life. That's not what he's saying. But it is saying, as he says here, Shibayama, when all the dualistic oppositions, such as good and evil, right and wrong, love and hatred, gain and loss, and the like, are completely transcended. That's when one lives in the realm of the absolute. Very often those dichotomies or dualities are very culture-bound, very temporary, and are ultimately transcended, when you reach a certain level of awareness. There's a really good example of that in this, in the finale of the Game of Thrones, which apparently goes back to things that have been said before, and you can understand this very well. One character says to another, "Duty is the death of love," and the other character replies, "Love is the death of duty." So there's a dichotomy, and there are certainly some horrific, liaisons made, numerous ones throughout the Game of Thrones, love liaisons, which are disasters, all right? So often love, in that restricted sense, can be the death of duty, and vice versa. There are plenty of examples. Look at Guinevere and Lancelot, Tristan and Isolde, Romeo and Juliet. There are constant examples of the best example of all from classical antiquity is Virgil's Aeneid. Virgil, Aeneas, Pius Aeneas, loyal Aeneas, as he's called by Virgil, is on his way to found Rome, but he gets distracted in Carthage by the queen, Dido. I remember my Jesuit Latin teacher telling me and saying to us in high school, so that's it, Dido or duty? So in other words, am I going to stay here and fall in love with this queen, or am I going to fulfill my duty? So partial duties and partial loves are often going to be in conflict, and you have to discern which is right. So in that sense, those dualities, those dichotomies that have been presented are true. But as I was saying recently in a teisho about do we live for duty like Kant, or do we live for happiness like Aristotle and St. Thomas, eudaimonism or deontology? So, and I pointed out, in the end, there isn't a conflict, because your greatest duty is what gives you the greatest happiness, because it's love. Love is your greatest duty and your greatest happiness, and there can't be a conflict there. So the same here, duty and love that come together. Whether you're talking about Buddhism or Christianity or any tradition, ultimately, universal compassion, a universal love, is your ultimate and absolute true self and true duty. And so that's how the good and evil, that's how what seems to be good or evil on a lower level is all transcended in something higher. Universal compassion and universal duty is the same. So those are some of the lessons I think we can learn from the koan and also from the series. Anyone have any further comments or remarks about the themes that I've raised? So hopefully we can all learn to pursue true power, which is empowering, which is love and compassion, and avoid all these horrific pitfalls, that even religious people can fall into, because Christianity has been empire building for centuries. During the Second World War, Zen was used to further the military operation. So even religion can be twisted and turned, into this, error, into this false understanding. So we have to be really careful that we sit in silence and understand and live.